All right, again, thank you everybody for joining us today for our first webinar of 2023, hosted by Marcum Technology. Get ready for year end with Sage Intacct. Just need to go over a few of the standard housekeeping items before we get started. Marcum LLP and Marcum Technology LLC have prepared these materials as part of an educational program. The information contained herein is of a general nature and is not intended to address the circumstances of any particular individual, entity, or case. While every effort has been made to offer current and accurate information, errors can occur. Furthermore, laws and regulations referred to in this program may change over time and should be interpreted only in light of particular circumstances. The information presented here should not be construed as legal, tax, accounting, or valuation advice. No one should act on such information without appropriate professional advice after a thorough examination of the particular situation. During today's presentation, you can submit your questions to our presenters using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom platform. The presenters will get to as many questions as they can throughout and at the end of the webinar. We will provide a copy of the slides and the link to the recording to all attendees post-event. And if you would like to receive continuing professional education credits for CPAs for attending today's session, you'll need to be active in the Zoom platform for a minimum of 50 minutes and answer 3 of the 4 polling questions that will appear at random points on your screen during the presentation. Each poll will be active for about 1 minute. There are no right or wrong answers, but be sure to select an answer and click submit for tracking purposes. And now I'll pass it over to Buu-Linh Tran, Vice President of Financial Solutions at Marcum Technology.
Thank you, Erin, and Happy New Year, everyone. We're super excited to be here. We actually have a lot of people attending, so it's excited to see everyone is, getting ready for just to kick off the new year. Today's webinar is on getting ready for year end with Sage Intacct. We have a lot of materials to cover today, so we'll be going through this presentation pretty quickly. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask the Q&A or send us your questions and we'll answer it. So just a quick intro. I'm Buu-Linh Tran. I'm a VP in our financial solutions practice at Marcum Tech. I have over 20 years of experience working with a number of ERP solutions, including Sage Intacct. As a firm, we've been a partner with Sage for over 12 years. Ever since Sage opened up their VAR channel, we've been a partner with them. I also have a lot of experience working with a number of FP&A solutions, as well as other budgeting solutions also. Most of my focus has been in nonprofit. I have over 20 plus years of nonprofit experience. Vivian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Vivian Perot, and I have worked in a nonprofit, public accounting, for-profit companies as well. I've been with Marcum for almost 5 years now, and I've overseen multiple accounting departments for multiple clients in different industries, working with a number of ERPs, focusing on automating accounting and financial processes by implementing IT solutions. So focusing mostly on Intacct and a number of FP&A solutions as well.
Right. So today's agenda, we have just a few slides to talk about who we are, Marcum and Marcum Technology, and then we'll jump right into the month-end close process, what that looks like, what's involved. Then we'll transition to additional process with year-end. So, year-end, of course, encompasses the month-end close, and then, of course, there are other processes taking place with the year, including 1099, and then we'll wrap it up with audit preparations. So who is Marcum and Marcum Technology? Marcum Technology is a wholly owned subsidiary within the Marcum LLP family. Marcum LLP is a CPA firm, and Marcum Technology is the technology arm of Marcum. So Marcum as a whole, we are 12, we're ranked 12 nationally. We have over 3,500 professionals, and we have various offices throughout the US. Right below here, you'll see that we service a number of industries. And I do work with a number of industries, both Vivian and myself have a strong focus within the nonprofit. Within Marcum Technology, we have 5 pillars of services. I'm just going to quickly go through these. We start out with the cloud and infrastructure services, where we have worked with clients to help build out sort of the infrastructure. We have telecommunication optimization, cloud services. So that's really part of that that practice line. Then we've got managed IT services. So a number of our clients may outsource their IT support to a firm like us, where we provide help desk support from a technology perspective. And then we have a fairly large group in the cybersecurity and digital forensic area, where we help clients secure their business with cybersecurity services. The fourth, it's digital consulting. That's the practice that both Vivian and I belong to. Specifically, we're part of the financial ERP and FP&A solutions within digital consulting. What does that mean? It means that we support, we implement a number of financial solutions. So one of the solution, of course, is Sage Intacct. That's a true cloud-based solution. There's another cloud-based solution that we support. It's called Acumatica. We've been a partner with Acumen for a number of years now, and budgeting and FP&A. So those include Planful, Vena, as well as Martis. So those are some of the solutions that we support, and there are more. I just want to highlight those. But other areas in digital consulting include robotic process automation, and we have a pretty big practice in that area as well. And lastly, we've got strategic consulting. A number of our clients need support in terms of looking at their back office operations and seeing how they can leverage technology to really streamline their operations. So that wraps up our 5 pillars of services. So there's a quick polling question. So take a second to answer that to get your CPE. So I'm just moving forward here. So we'll start the month-end process with the checklist. So Sage, about a year and a half ago, well, actually maybe about 2 years ago, released this functionality in terms of giving users an ability to set up checklist. This is an example of a checklist. You can create a checklist. You can create any checklist. Most common checklist would be month-end checklist. So you can take a month-end checklist, duplicate it, and then build a year-end checklist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition to Sage. So here's Sage Intacct. And I mentioned that Sage is a true cloud-based solution. So you log into Sage Intacct. Here's my checklist right here. So what I've done is I've added the checklist right in my dashboard. So this is an example of a dashboard. Here's my checklist. So I can open up my checklist. Here's a checklist, and I open it up directly from within my dashboards. I don't have to open it up this way, but it was very easy for me, right? Right in the dashboard, I'll just bring it up. So here, I'm just going to edit one of these checklists here. Here is where you can complete this checklist. You'll complete the information at the top. Anything in asterisk is required, and then you identify the assignment. You can give it a description. You can set your begin and end date, and you can assign it to who you want to assign to work on the assignment. And then that person can then come in here and then indicate the status of that assignment. If it's complete, they can indicate the percentage, if it's in progress, it can indicate the percentage of completion. If it's completed, you can indicate 100%. And then you can indicate the date that it was completed, attachments and comments, right? The the other comment I want to make is that when you assign a task to someone to work on, he or she will get an email. So for example, this task was assigned to Peter Pan. And so an email was sent to Peter regarding the assignment that he has a task to complete. Another comment I want to make, a common question I've been asked is who can be the one, who can be on this that you can assign a task to. It would be a business users, because in reality, who would be completing a month-end checklist would be someone within the accounting department, right? Folks are within your accounting department tend to be the business users. So that would be a business users who would be completing that. So now I mentioned that, you can take a month-end, you can take a monthly checklist and basically transition it to a year-end checklist. And how would you do that? You can duplicate this, and any of these checklists you can duplicate it, and then just add on to it, to make it a new checklist. Or the other way to do it, so you can import checklist items as well. Now, on the workflow, if you've assigned someone to work on a task, I mentioned that that person will get an email. This is an example of an email. I set this up last night, so you can see that Peter received an email with a task. I backdated it a couple of years, but there was an assignment to reconcile a prepaid and indicate when the assignment is due. So this is an example of a checklist. If you're not using Sage Intacct checklist today, highly recommend it that you check it out. You can't really break anything because all it is a checklist. You're not really changing any data or anything. So this is a great way to leverage the checklist functionality within Sage Intacct. So I'm going to hand this presentation over to Vivian, who's going to go through the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Vivian can.
Hey, thanks, Buu-Linh.
Sure.
I am going to start sharing. Okay, so like Buu-Linh mentioned, we're going to start with the month-end close process because the year-end close process takes additional steps on top of the month-end close process, right? So when we're talking about some things to put on that checklist that Buu-Linh mentioned, we want to make sure that on your month-end close process that all transactions have been processed, have been completed, the workflows, the approvals have all been completed before you close the month, right? So we're talking about posting all invoices, reviewing Intacct, making sure that all the receipts that you received that month have been posted. If we're talking about year end, you want to make sure that everything that was received during that year, all cash receipts during that year have been posted in the correct period. Purchasing transactions were approved. Timesheets and expense reports have all been through the workflow, have been all approved and have been posted in the correct periods, right? We want to make sure to post closing entries, your accruals, anything else that doesn't come in through the AP, AR. So we're talking about maybe if you have some advanced modules, fixed assets, if you have fixed assets, that those depreciation entries get posted, revenue recognition, any allocations, any of those advanced modules, any of those other entries that need to come in, that make sure that those closing entries are posted in the correct period and that someone has reviewed them and made sure that they're posted for a month end. Of course, we want to make sure that banks are always reconciled, all the bank accounts are reconciled. And you can upload your bank statements into those reconciliations, so the support is there. And reconciling the sub-ledger to the general ledger, right? So that's a good process. That's a best practice, right? To always run your sub-ledger report, your AP aging, your AR aging, and making sure that they tie to your trial balance. If you guys want to see, I can show you Intacct. And what we're talking about here is going into these subledgers and running your AP, and here's your AP ledger, your vendor aging reports. Same thing with your AR, and going into the AR, your customer aging reports, and then just comparing those to the trial balance and making sure that your totals tie at the end of the month, right? After your processes have been completed, you want to close the books, right? Again, we know that not all clients do that. We know not everyone does that. But it's just a best practice to make sure that things are posted, entries are posted in the correct period and not entered into other periods by mistake that may be open. So closing the sub-ledger and closing the general ledger. So when we talk about closing the sub-ledger and closing the general ledger, in Intacct, these are two different things, right? You can close the sub-ledger and you could use two different dates, right? So you could close the sub-ledger, let's say for the 10th of the month, right? And that's closing AR, closing AP. You don't want anything else to sink into AP anymore. You want to give your teams time to reconcile all those accounts, right? All the sub-ledgers, make sure that everything is reconciled before you close the general ledger. So then let's say you close the sub-ledger on the 10th of the month, and that gives your teams time to post those other entries that we discussed, right? Their accruals, maybe the depreciation, revenue recognition, anything like that. And then you close the general ledger on the 15th of the month. So that gives you a chance to close the books on two separate days, the sub-ledger on one date and the general ledger a couple of days later, giving your team time to reconcile all those accounts. And the way that you would do that is by going into those modules, like I just showed you, going into accounts payable. There's the option right here on the sub-ledger to close the sub-ledger, or you could open it. You could set the closing date. Same thing here by going into the general ledger. Here's the option for the books, and you can open and close. And you can pick the dates that you want to close or open the books.
I just wanted to add that Sage Intacct doesn't have a concept of a hard close. So there are systems out there where, you know, you might have heard the term soft close and hard close. Within Sage, it's really just soft close, but it is, you know, as Vivian said, closing your subledger is not required, or even general ledger is not required, but it is best practice. And so you don't want people to accidentally post something that is part of 2023 to be accidentally posted in 2022, right? And so and then the reason why I say that it doesn't really have the concept of a hard close, in some systems, when you do a close, you can't reopen it once it's done. That's not the situation with Sage Intacct. So even if you close, let's say you come back and there were adjustments that need to be made, you can always reopen. Whether the subledger, hopefully you don't need to reopen the subledger, but you know, you open up, like say, the general ledger to post whatever adjustments as needed. It's actually a good practice to close every month, even if you know, not necessarily just to close it at the end of the year. but to have just as best practice to close to close the period as part of your month-end process.
Right, thanks for that information, Buu-Linh. Right, and like Buu-Linh said, if you have not performed if you haven't closed for any of the months, let's say this year, right, you can still choose to close the entire year. So you don't have to go back and close each individual month. You can just go ahead now and close the entire year. So that's the flexibility that Intacct provides. It has the tools to increase visibility around the close process. And it could be the same process for month end and for year end close. Okay, so on top of those close processes that we discussed, some additional processes for year end that we recommend. Buu-Linh touched on adjusting journal entries, and these we see commonly used for audit adjustments. We're going to go into Intacct and show you how those adjusting journal entries work, how they're entered, and how you can review them. We're also going to go over the reporting periods you can verify, create reporting periods. The 1099 preparation, of course, that's a big one. I think that's what a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are working on right now, is the 1099 process. And then some maintenance. And again, in Intacct, it's not mandatory, but it's just a best practice. Again, after your year end, after you close everything, your accounts are reconciled, 1099s are prepared, just go in. A couple of things that I recommend are reviewing your user permissions and access, just making sure that anyone that left the accounting department, anyone that left that has access, should have been removed at that moment. But in case there weren't, it's just a nice year-end review. Make sure that the access is appropriate to the level. Review and update recurring entries. I use recurring entries. I highly recommend recurring entries. Anything that's, again, if there's depreciation, if there's some accruals, if there's some entries that are the same on a monthly basis, I highly recommend using the recurring entries, setting them up. That way you don't have to worry about them. But the thing is that you can set them up for multiple years. So again, at the year end, I recommend reviewing them and just making sure that they're still valid. I recommend only setting them up for a year, not anything longer than that. And then that way you review if any changes come up, you can make those changes to your recurring entries. Another thing, I highly recommend deactivating accounts, departments, projects, vendors, customers, just reviewing your chart of accounts, seeing if any accounts should be deactivated. That's really easy. Same thing with your departments and projects, just so that you don't have a lengthy chart of accounts, lengthy list while you're trying to code things. And also unused reports, deactivating unused reports. So I think reports, financial reports is something that can get lengthy and complicated, in the sense that anyone with access can create reports, and then you just have a whole list of reports, and then it makes it just convoluted to look for the report that you actually need. So it's just another year-end maintenance thing, just to go in and review the reports that no one is really using, and it's just a click of a button just to deactivate. So in the adjusting journal entries, posting into a closed period and posting, and you're going to see them in the trial balance. Oh, we also have the CPE polling question number 2. So you guys can look at that while I pull up Intacct. Okay, so we're talking about. Okay, so if you can see Intact, we just went to the general ledger and went to adjusting entries. So here's an adjusting entries journal. We want to view transactions. These are just some sample transactions that we posted in here. So adjusting journal entries can only be posted in closed periods. That's why I said we mostly see these during the audit, right? The auditor sends you some adjusting journal entries and you want to go ahead and post them. You don't want to leave December open forever, but you want to go ahead maybe and close December and then post those audit adjustments as adjusting journal entries. They could be drafted in open periods and later posted once the books are closed, but they just cannot be posted while the books remain open in that open state. So it has to be a closed period for these audit adjustments to be posted. Here you have your description, your journal. Again, you saw that we went into the adjusting journals, the adjusting entry journals. You have your posting date. You could have your reference entity, just like a regular journal entry. Then when you run your trial balance, you'll just see that these adjusting debits, adjusting credits, you'll see them populate here. Okay, so you can just click in, drill in, and you'll see the adjusting journal entry that was posted. And that's just like that screen that where we entered them right here. And so that's why we recommend another tool like that is the adjusting journals. And that's just any transaction that's done after the financial statements are being shared with the auditors. They could be tracked that way. That way it's easy to identify, and you're not trying to guess which entries were posted by the audit adjustments. And you're not trying to keep a separate log, let's say a separate list in Excel, and trying to keep track of the adjusting and journal entries. If you do it that way, it's easy, like you showed you just go into the trial balance, you see all the adjusting journal entries, you can drill into them right there, write your reference, why it was done, why the auditors said, or their explanation for it, and that way it's easy. Reporting periods. We also touched on reporting periods. And reporting periods in Intact, they're used to create reports, budgets. They're used when you open and you close books. They let you limit the information on the report to specific time ranges. So with reporting periods, you could either create periods manually, you can import these periods with an Excel file, or Intact can create these reporting periods. You can choose default reporting periods. The caveat with using the default reporting periods in Intact is that Intact looks at the farthest date which you have transactions posted in order to determine the default reporting period. So what that means is, let's say you have, for some reason, someone entered erroneously an entry dated March 3rd, let's say 2050. Right, something out there because that reporting period was open. So let's say they posted that an entry out there that far. So when you click on Intact to create the default reporting periods, it's going to create reporting periods through the year end of 2050. So that's why another reason to watch out for the open and closed periods to make sure you don't have transactions in the wrong dates. And if we go to Intacct, you will see that. We're going to go into company. We're going to go into setup. We're going to go into reporting periods. I'm having issues with my
Is it
monitor
general
here. Do
ledger?
you see it?
Is it general ledger? Reporting periods under the more column?
Yeah, one of my monitors went out, so I'm working on one small monitor here. Okay, so reporting periods are right here. So like we said.
And you can also import these reporting periods. So let's say if you need to set up reporting periods, you could add them here manually, or you can go into company and then under company, under the setup, you'll be able to see import. And this is all the import templates. Included in here is the reporting periods. And so you can import, you can, if you click template, you'll get the template and then what it looks like. Some of these templates even have examples of what the file should look like when you import it, but this is, I would recommend importing it if you need to create a reporting period. It's the easiest way to get them in.
Correct. So like Buu-Linh said, this is the, you go to company, setup, imports, and here is where you can download the template. Here's where you would import them. And here's that default that I was talking about, creating default periods, but you want to be careful with what's the furthest data transaction that you have out there before you click that default. Another way just to review would be to go to your reports, go to setup, and then go to your reporting periods right here. And that's where we were, just to see, you can review here whether the reporting periods that you already have in Intacct. So in this example here, in this demo environment, we have up through December 2025. So that way we know there isn't anything open out there for 2050 or so. With that, we come up to what everyone was waiting for, and that's the 1099 preparations. So we know that a lot of people are working right now on 1099s. It's 1099 season. And Intacct has a lot of tools. It has a lot of functionality to help you work with the 1099s. Some things that we recommend are attaching W-9s to vendor records, right? And that's maintenance throughout the year so that you're not rushing to do this at year end, right? Designate a vendor as a 1099 vendor while you're working through that invoice through that vendor. Find fixing mistakes and update transactions. And so what we're saying is that there's different ways to be proactive to minimize this year-end chaos. One of the things here that we're showing are smart rules, right? So Intacct has this feature called smart rules. And in this example, we created smart rules to set tax ID as a required field, or you can even make attachments a requirement on vendors, right? So when a new vendor is created, there's and you try to save it without a tax ID, an error message will come up and say, hey, wait a minute, the smart rule is set up saying that a tax ID is required on vendors. Hey, we need this before you can save it. Another thing is Intacct smart events. right? So besides the smart rule, a smart event, and that's a notification email that it can be sent out when new vendors are created. You specify who should receive this email. So let's say someone in your AP person, your AP clerk, processes a new vendor. They create the new vendor. This email, according to the smart event that was set up in Intacct, sends out this email to the controller or the AP manager, whoever you want, and says, hey, a new vendor was created. You can set up this email. Hey, a new vendor was created. And please review the vendor for legitimacy and accuracy. And these smart rules and smart events, these are part of the Intacct core package. There aren't any additional fees to use these. So I highly recommend, if anyone has Intacct already, all of you that have them, to really make use of these smart rules and smart events, because you could use them for a number of things. We talked about 1099 vendors. So after you have your vendors created and you have your vendor list, something that you want to look out for is just reviewing that 1099 list. You might want to do it again throughout the year, maybe, so you're just not doing it all at year end. And just looking at the list of 1099 vendors. You could customize this view. AP vendors right here. So here's all your different views. You can customize your view. We have one that's set up. We created one that's just for 1099 vendors. So that way we could review and pick the fields that we want to review with the 1099. Right, if there are other fields that you would like to see in that view, then this is just, you just click edit right there, and then you can select which fields you want to view in there. You can pick and choose your column sequence and the way that it appears, your filters, you can sort your results. In order to create this view that we're talking about right here. So this way you can, this is a quick view at all your 1099 vendors with all their information, the vendor name, vendor ID, 1099 type, the box, tax ID, everything that you need right here. And here's a CSV for import option. So the way that you could use this CSV is different from this one. CSV for import, let's say you can, something needs to change, right? Or you see that there's a mistake on a number of these. Actually, all these miscellaneous really should be NEC. You can just export the CSV for import, make the changes that you need to make, and then just import them right back in. And the way that you would import them right back in is just the way that we discussed, by going to company, setup, and importing data. And these are all your options to import would be right there.
And is there a template, Vivian, for importing information regarding here? Are we just updating the vendor status, or what are we updating?
Right here, we're updating the vendors, right? Because we're up here in the vendors module, in the AP module under the vendors list. So I'm going to show you next how to import 1099 data. So that's very important. Thanks, Buu-Linh, for mentioning that, because this is just the vendor data, right? Their name, their city.
And there's a vendor data template for updating vendor.
Right. Okay, so some common errors that we see And there's a CPE polling question number 3. So you guys can take some time. Okay, so some common errors that we've seen with 1099 preparation, right? After you reviewed that 1099 list that we saw, you run your 1099 report. Some common errors that we see, pretty often are the vendor was flagged as a 1099 vendor. And the reporting impact could be understated. Your reports are understated. The vendor was erroneously flagged as a 1099 vendor when it should have, right? So here, maybe it should have been flagged as a 1099, but it wasn't. So it's understated. Your vendor here was tagged as a 1099, but it shouldn't have been. So now your 1099 report is overstated. Maybe the wrong 1099 type box was selected, and the vendor 1099 amount is correctly reported, right? So these are the most common that we see in 1099 preparation. We're going to go into Intacct and see the options for correcting those, again, most common errors are updating the 1099 opening balance and the 1099 transaction edit and reclassifying transactions. We're going to go into Intacct and look at that. So another thing that we've seen with 1099s is, let's say you implemented Intacct in June, right? But now you need the 1099 balances and the 1099 totals from January through June that exist in your other system, right? So something that you could do is just go into Intacct and update the 1099 opening balances. This won't impact your financial statements. It won't impact the GL. It'll only impact the 1099s. Go into accounts payable, because that's what 1099s live. You'll see the 1099. This is the 1099 report. And run it for the period that you are, for the year that you're working on. And you'll see that this 1099 report has multiple filters over here. So you can group it by category. I prefer to group it by category. That way I can see easily what category I'm reviewing. All the different 1099 form types. And here's a good one, transaction information, right? If you want to review all the vendors, which I highly recommend also, is selecting all vendors, right? That way you see which ones, which there may be some vendors that you didn't mark as 1099 that really should be 1099s. And then you have some 1099 vendors that maybe shouldn't be marked as 1099. So maybe for the first one, maybe run it all, but I suggest at some point reviewing all your vendors to make sure that they're marked appropriately. So here we're only going to look at our 1099 vendors. And here you can see, like I said, all the different filters. If you want to look at only a specific type of vendor, if it's a specific vendor. And in this example, this is the entire list of what we have. The transaction information, you could run it all if you want to review again all vendors. In this case, we only looked at the specific 1099 vendors. Here, if you see that this is drillable, go ahead, Buu-Linh.
I was going to say, Vivian, if you have a new client that needs to update, their opening balance on the 1099, where would they be going to? Where is that?
Yeah, so I was going to show, so there's different ways, right? So here you saw that I drilled into that in the 1099 report. I was able to drill in to the transaction itself. One way to do it is to edit this one right here. I'm in that transaction. I say, hey, this is incorrect. I can reclassify it. All I did was click edit. I can reclassify it right here. And I can make the edits that need to be, maybe it's not 1099, maybe it should have been different information there. And Buu-Linh, you're saying for initial, let me get back to that report. Okay, so this is we're going to run the report again. And this is, you can look for this vendor and do it through the vendor screen. But if you're already in the 1099 report, like we said, we're reviewing the 1099 report. And you see this Jane Doe, you see that transaction. We're going to look for Jane Doe in the vendors. Here's Jane Doe. Click edit on Jane Doe. Additional information. Here's where you'll see the form 1099. Right, so if you click on form 1099, here is the compensation. So here's where you can enter, adjust the beginning balances. So we're going to say in this example, we're using 2021 for the reports. Here she has a beginning balance of 10,000, opening balance of 10,000. So if I say, hey, actually, this is a mistake, it should have been more, or like I said, if you implemented Intacct, let's say in June, you have balances for earlier in the year in your other system, and you know that this is going to be 15,000, you can just make that change right here, and that'll change your opening balances for 1099. And again, that won't impact your financial statements. It won't impact the GL. It's just going to change it's going to update your 1099 report.
And it's also just as a comment, you've got the, you've got the form name, you've got the 1099 box. Make sure that you update the 1099 to the right 1099 NEC, because there could be multiple options in terms of 1099 NEC is not the only 1099, correct? So you want to make sure you select the right one to update accordingly.
Right, and what Buu-Linh is referring to over here is all the form names. Here's all the different options. And again, yeah, if you notice that you made a mistake, if this really shouldn't be an NSC, it should be a miscellaneous, or it was marked miscellaneous, but it should really be an NSC, this is where you would come in and change that. And if you change it, then all the boxes will change accordingly. See, now it's now this is according to dividends or total, and it'll update this accordingly, so you don't have to do any of that manually. So on top of Intacct, right? So you saw a short preview of how Intacct works with 1099s. Marcum has this utility. Marcum built a utility, and it's 1099prep.com. And this is going to help you to import 1099 info. It will guide you step by step on how to import and file your 1099s. Buu-Linh, what other information?
So I would say that if this is something that you're interested in, this is a service that Marcum built. We built a 1099 preparation service where Marcum will file the 1099 on your behalf. If that's something that you're interested in, let us know. We would connect you with that practice, and they can provide additional information with regards to this service.
And with that, we have the CPE polling question number 4.
And just a quick comment. So Vivian showed you how to update the 1099 within the transaction itself. She went to the vendor and pull up the 1099 setup where you could update the amount. Let's say if you transition from another system to Sage Intacct, you need to put in that amount. You can do it there. There's also in the screen where you had all the templates, data import screen, there's also a 1099 file that allows you to update, not transaction by transaction, but a mass update. So that is the third option. I'm not sure, if we have enough time to show that. Vivian, I wasn't sure if you were planning to show that if we had enough time, but that there is an import utility that allows you to also update the 1099. Here it is.
Correct. So Buu-Linh is talking about going back into that import screen that we saw, going into company, import. And I'm going to search for 1099. So here's the first one is a transaction update. Here's the import, here's a template, and here's the opening balances, the import and the template. I downloaded those templates and this is what they look like. So the 1099 transaction update, here's what the fields that you would put in there. And the way that you would use this 1099 transaction update template is to update transactions that are already tagged for 1099 treatment to a different form or to a different type in a different box. So here's where you have the type. Hey, this is an NEC. It should be miscellaneous. This shouldn't be box 1, but it should be box 7. This is where you would do it. From to date, the vendor name, update the transactions for a vendor, including those that are not currently flagged for 1099 treatment with a specified default form type and box. You can update the 1099 name for a vendor. So, hey, while you're reviewing the 1099 report, you notice that this vendor shouldn't be Jane Doe. It should really have a different last name. So this is where you would do it, right? So if you have a number of changes that you would need to make, it's highly recommended to use a template and importing them instead of going into each vendor record and doing them there, or into each 1099 vendor record and doing them there. Is just, if you have a number of them, you just do it through an import. The 1099 opening balance, this is what we just showed you by going into that other screen. Then here is a quick import if you have several of them, like Buu-Linh said, and you can just add all the vendor name, all these fields, and then just add all the amounts that you need to add for your opening balances. That's what you were referring to, right, Buu-Linh?
Correct. So you could do it individually, but of course, if you have a lot, you would probably want it would be easier to just load that data in.
Right. With audit preparation, what we have done for some clients also is to create an employee user with view-only access to certain modules, and that way give the auditors their login so that they can view. You can absolutely restrict the modules, restrict what you want them to see, and then that way it saves your team many hours of audit work by searching and looking for the information that the auditors can go in and search for themselves. We have also created custom reports where they're just easy for the auditors to go in and search for their own entries in their samples and just drill down into the reports and get their own, pull up the attachments, anything else that you post into those entries. Do we have time to go into that, Buu-Linh, or?
We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay, do you want to go over this then? Or?
Yeah, so let me just mention this. So the upcoming events that we have tomorrow, We do support a number of ERP solutions, one of which is Dynamics GP. So if you're on Dynamics GP or know anyone on Dynamics GP, this is the webinar to attend. We'll go through very similar to what we're going through today, addressing year-end close 1099 process. So that's tomorrow. And then later this month, we will be talking about how you can implement the new lease accounting standard ASC 842 with ease. And when we say with ease, that means that we're going to be, this is a technology webinar, so we'll be talking about a tool. It's Lease Query. It's a third-party solution that helps streamline or help you implement ASC 842, and the ASC 842 was actually required starting last year. So from a reporting perspective, starting this year, pretty much most companies are going to be required to reflect the new standards in their financial report. So, and that is later this month on January 26th. So Vivian, it looks like we are done with the presentations, correct?
Yes, we are done with the presentation. I mean, we could go into this even further. There's just so much functionality within Intacct that'll just help with the year-end process. It looks like we have some items in the chat and Q&A. I don't know if anyone had a chance to review those.
So let's take a look. We have a few minutes left. Let's take a look at some of the questions here. So one of the question is, will those adjusting entry be in period, go beyond period 12? So they are not going to go beyond period 12. They are going to be part of, you're going to indicate, when you book the adjusting entry, you're going to indicate what period that they would be in. It's almost like pretty much like a regular journal entry, except that you're indicating that these are adjusting entries, so that they would appear on the adjusting columns. The other differentiation about those is that you would be posting them after period 12 is closed, right? So they're intended to be adjusting entry, such as audit adjustment. That's a classic adjusting entry. Now, and I'm going to comment that most of our clients actually don't use adjusting entry, even though they're there for some reason, they're just not commonly used. We just wanted to bring it to your attention that it's there. If you're not using the adjusting entry, I would highly recommend, and if you're going to post it as a journal entry, I would highly recommend that you at least create a separate journal for them. That way you really don't have to hunt for it if you ever need to look at what are my audit entries, right? So a regular, journal type, you can have different journals. It doesn't have to be GJ, although GJ is very common, but you can create any. We commonly, as we work with client, have other journal type like LC, labor costing journal, or payroll journals. And so this will just be a different journal. So hopefully I answer your questions. If not, feel free to reach back out to us. There is another question regarding the tax bandits. We actually don't have time to go over that, but be happy to loop back with you or on that question and any other questions that you guys have. We'll be available to address those as well. If you have anything, after this, if any other questions, feel free to reach back out to us. We have our contact is at the end of the PowerPoint. Vivian, if you can loop back, bring up the PowerPoint, and just so the folks have our contact, feel free to reach out to us. And we'll probably also follow up with you, regarding this presentation as well, just to make, just to see if you have any questions for us. So I wanted to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vivian. Thanks, Aaron. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.